Welcome back once again to Classical Homeopathy with Bill Gray. This video I would like to address the results that we get in homeopathy. Of course, I've already mentioned the acute results that started homeopathy and spread it throughout the world, treating scarlet fever, yellow fever, malaria especially, typhoid, cholera, influenza, and it became famous rapidly because of that. One striking research shows that during the 1918 influenza epidemic, the results with homeopathy were astounding worldwide. In San Francisco alone, there was an allopathic hospital, excuse me, there was an allopathic hospital and a homeopathic hospital. The death rate in the allopathic hospital was 45% of those who were hospitalized died. In the homeopathic hospital, of those who were hospitalized, only 3 people, not 3%, but 3 people died. Homeopathy was very effective in that 1918 flu epidemic, and it remains so even now. I mentioned the results that we're getting with eremedyonline.com. In Sierra Leone, we had 111 cases of malaria, 110 of which were free of chills and fever within 2 to 3 hours, and 18 of which continued to have back pain and headache for another 24 hours, but they were free of the fever and chills, and they were symptom-free after that. So homeopathy works in acutes. That's nothing new to our discussions. In the chronic cases, the best way for me to approach that is probably to talk about my own cases. I'm not trying to put myself out there as being an exceptional homeopath. In the classical homeopathy world, there are many others that are even more effective, or at least as effective as what I'm describing here. And so all classical homeopaths could give this same talk, just as I would. But what I did is I went back in my records, especially my computer records, and looked up some old cases just to give you an idea of what can be done. I think I've mentioned a PhD who had Meniere syndrome, which is characterized by severe vertigo and hearing loss. And the vertigo is to such an extreme in her case that she was continuously vomiting and actually had to stay in a bathroom next to the toilet, to the point where she injured her shoulder from being locked in there just to keep on vomiting from the Meniere's. She had the Meniere's for many years. Her case was a challenge. I tried a number of remedies. It took a few years to find the right remedy. We finally had to make the remedy. It was not known before. That remedy was fire ant. And long story short, after she got fire ant, she gradually got better over especially the first 3 months and then over the next year. And now she's been completely symptom-free of that ailment for 20 years now. Hers was an interesting case because she had a phobia of anything spinning above her head. And she researched fire ants and the way they live. It turns out that after she was cured, the researchers in Texas, I think it was, found out that fire ants are paranoid of wasps that fly overhead because they implant their eggs into the brains of the fire ants, and the eggs grow up and explode the brain. So that's how they perpetuate the species. And so that phobia that she had was also a phobia that fire ants actually had. We just didn't know that. Research hadn't picked up on that. That's one case. Another case is a musician who had diagnosed Lyme disease. He was treated. He had severe headaches, brain fog, gas, constipation. He'd been on antibiotics for many years, well, I think 3 years, and they failed. They did not work, which is pretty typical in chronic Lyme disease cases. He received a remedy called China, that was cinchona bark, which I mentioned earlier as a treatment for malaria. I mean, that was just incidental, but based on his symptoms and his personality, we gave him China. And he now has been symptom-free for at least 12 years. I haven't heard back from him recently. Another case was a psychotherapist who was having all kinds of marital problems, which led to her having ulcerative colitis, an autoimmune disease, which is often follows high stress situations. And she received the remedy arsenicum album, which is made from arsenic, and of course it's only the energy of the arsenic. Her symptom-free time is 19 years, so almost 20 years. Probably it is 20 years by now. Another case is an accountant who I first saw in California, well, before she became an accountant. She's now moved to the Midwest, but originally she had multiple sclerosis with optic neuritis, and then that progressed to paralysis of one of her legs. She received a remedy called causticum, which was invented by Hahnemann, and I recently saw her on a follow-up for just an acute problem, and she's been symptom-free of the multiple sclerosis now for 20 years. She did have one relapse for a few days 5 years ago after an antidote, but the same remedy put her back on track, and now she's been symptom-free for 5 years. Another case to mention is a horsewoman that I saw 20 years ago. She had migraines, severe depression, and recurrent bladder infections. She got 2 remedies actually. Staph aureus was one that cured the bladder infections, as I mentioned in one of the previous videos, and then she got a remedy called sepia, which is made from the ink of the cuttlefish, and she's been symptom-free now for 19 years. Another case is a rheumatoid arthritis software engineer who had rheumatoid arthritis of his fingers and his major joints. He received lycopodium, which I think is a remedy I mentioned in passing. It's made from a club moss that lives at the base of trees. His symptoms now have been gone for 11 years. And another is a woman who had squamous cell carcinoma of the vagina that had spread locally to the bladder. And she believed in homeopathy and, against my advice, refused to do allopathic medicine, and they didn't know what to expect from that. She received arsenicum album, and her symptoms, her tumor shrank and disappeared from both the bladder and the vagina within a month, and that's now been over 13 years that she's been symptom-free. Another case that comes to mind is a postal worker who climbed telephone poles and did all kinds of work, and he had terrible asthma and allergies that he had had for 28 years. He received the remedy metarhinum, which happens to be made from a gonorrhea microbe. Of course, it's the energy of the metarhinum, not the actual microbe that he got. And his symptoms, his wife has come in to see me, so I know that his symptoms have been completely gone for 17 years. Another woman that I saw recently who's basically healthy, but she was just checking in. She's a priest in one of the churches, and she had severe suicidal depression and severe sinusitis and sinus headaches, actually while she was in another country. She received the remedy Thuya, that was made from the tree, and I've mentioned that in the talks. She now tells me that it's been 14 years since her life was changed by this remedy, and she's completely symptom-free of all of that. Another one, just as a classic example, I'm sure all homeopaths have this story, is a child in Idaho that I did a case by video, and that was even a while ago, who had eczema. He now lives near me, or lived near my office in the Bay Area when I had that office, and he came by for another reason, but he'd been cured of his eczema for 14 years. And then the final case I'll mention is an accountant who had a very intense personality and an intense busy practice, actually very successful, who had had chronic bronchitis, allergic bronchitis, for most of his adult life, since I think he was a child, and I saw him when he was in his 30s, maybe almost 40. His daughter sees me, and so I know from him that his symptoms have been completely disappeared for 15 years. So, like I say, all classical homeopaths have similar results. There's nothing special about these results. This is classical for homeopathy. But it gives you an idea of the kind of treatment that you can accomplish for chronic disease if you see a classical homeopath. Thank you for listening.